Families do not break in one night, they loosen in tiny, polite ways, like a napkin slipping from a lap, until one careless laugh sends the whole setting to the floor. The candles arrived first, bobbing in the air like a small constellation over a chocolate sheet cake, and everyone shouted, 34? Because Ethan liked round numbers better than his real age. He said they sounded cleaner, more intentional. He stood at the head of the rented long table in a private room off a trendy downtown bistro, his name lettered in cursive on the menu as if he owned the place. In a way he did. He had financed the interior for the restaurateur as a favor. He told the story 3 times before the salad. Mag Collins kept her hands folded in her lap and counted the seconds between toasts. Counting calmed her. In hospitals and classrooms. Now at family parties where she was told to just relax, she counted. It was teacher's remnant and a widow's crutch. Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. The corners of her mouth were trained into a soft, agreeable smile. The trick she'd learned was to smile the way a lamp does, steady, unthreatening, something you could switch off without apology. Mom, Ethan called down the table, cutting through the music and the blooming conversations. "Do you see the piece they did on the firm?" He tapped his phone. Front page of the local business section that morning. Collins Capital expands community. We're basically philanthropists now. There was laughter, the kind that behaves like approval so you don't have to check if anyone is sincere. Maggie nodded. She had read the article twice at her kitchen counter. Coffee growing cold as she memorized the names of Ethan's partners, so she wouldn't ask the wrong person the wrong question later. "That's so wonderful," she said, and she meant it the way a mother means whether observant, steady, the same for all. Lena, her daughter-in-law, lifted a glass of white wine and made a show of leaning back in her chair, the silk sleeve of her dress whispering against the lacquer wood. She was beautiful in that curated way, lash extensions and a manicure so pale it seemed expensive not to be a color. She placed a thin hand, ring forward, on Ethan's forearm. "Honestly, Maggie," Lena said, voice bright enough to curry, "you don't even need to keep up with the business stuff. Just sit there and be proud. Ethan is taking care of everything." Room registered it as a compliment. Heads bobbed, forks paused midair. Someone at the far end, one of Ethan's friends from college, clinked his glass and said, "Amen to that," as if the line came from a hymn. Maggie's smile held. Careful practice thing. She could feel Chloe flinch beside her. Her younger child, all black eyeliner and camera straps, squeezed Maggie's knee beneath the table like a secret handshake. "Mom knows plenty," Chloe murmured under the music. Under the noise. Lena heard anyway. She had a talent for it, catching small dissent and lacing it with sugar. "Oh, Chloe, I didn't mean it that way," she said, not turning her head. "I just think it must be nice for Maggie, after everything to rest. Not everyone needs to hustle. Some of us deserve to be looked after." It took a moment for the sentence to finish falling. Looked after. Maggie tasted the syllables. Fell in love with such phrases because they sounded like kindness and felt like gravity. She smoothed the cloth napkin across her lap, as she had done with the quilting squares the year her husband was sick. The muscles remembered. Someone started a toast. It was Ethan, of course. He rose with a practiced humility, which is the only kind that photographs well. "To family," he said, angling the phone so Lena could film. "The people who believed in me when we had nothing but Dad's broken down Ford and a coffee can of coins for the laundromat." He grinned. "Remember that, Mom?" She did. She remembered the exact weight of wet jeans when the dryer ate her quarters. She remembered teaching long division to sixth graders by day and spooning ice chips into her husband's mouth by night. She remembered selling her grandmother's ring to make a mortgage payment and telling the kids it had been misplaced so they wouldn't grow up thinking love could be measured in carats. "Cheers," Mag said and lifted her water. It trembled, but no one was close enough to notice. "Tell them the story, Mom," Ethan urged. "The one about how you stretched a pot of chili for a week. It's like heroic." "Or depressing," Chloe said into her napkin. "It's real," Ethan countered. Not unkindly, but with the dismissive assurance of someone who prefers the arc of his story to the facts in it. "It shows where we came from. It shows why I work so hard." He was already waiting for the applause line, and Mag did not wish to be ungrateful on her son's birthday. She reached for a sentence that would not embarrass him or betray herself. Before she found it, Lena rose, champagne flute poised. "I'll go," Lena announced. "'Cause Ethan won't brag, so I will." She rested her fingertips at her sternum like a televangelist. "We talk a lot about sacrifice. And yes, Maggie, you did everything for your family when things were hard." She exhaled theatrically. "But there's a different kind of sacrifice, too, the sacrifice of vision. It sees 10 moves ahead so the rest of us don't have to." There was a hush shaped like admiration. "And that's the gift, Maggie," Lena concluded, eyes glittering. "You don't have to do anything anymore, just be proud. Let Ethan lead, he's providing for all of us." She smiled, a bright blade. "Otherwise, what are men good for?" Laughter, eager and loud. "There are jokes people tell so they don't have to ask how you're really doing." Chloe's grip on Maggie's knee tightened. "Do you want to step out?" she whispered. Maggie shook her head. "This is Ethan's night," she said. She had said some form of that sentence for 28 years, and it had never once sounded like surrender until now. The server arrived with a parade of entrees, white plates balanced like moons on forearms, and the room remembered its forks. Conversation flowed around Maggie as if she were a tasteful centerpiece, appreciated, ignored. She let her eyes soften and drift, gathering details. Her old habit of classroom observation returned like a song, the way people spoke over one another, the nods that meant, "I'm not listening, but I want you to like me," the small performative hungers we feed when we are afraid of being ordinary. "Mom," Eth said again, cheerful, a little louder because the phone needed clear audio. "Tell them what you do now, for fun." The table angled toward her. Maggie knew the correct answer. Had been trained by decades of social cues to give it. "Oh," she said lightly, "I garden. I started back at the community center a bit, reading to the kids, nothing much." "Isn't that sweet?" Someone sighed, as if she had announced she collected porcelain owls. Lena dipped her chin, triumphant. "See? Maggie's living the dream. No deadlines, no stress, no students." She giggled as if the word were a punchline. Just mothering. Something in Maggie, a small hinge. Quiet latch unhooked. She was surprised by the sound of it, not rage, not even grief. More like clarity, the kind that arrives when your prescription is finally correct. She thought of the day she signed the form to take an unpaid leave from teaching. Her husband had been so slight beneath the hospital sheet, his cheekbones like folded paper. She remembered placing her hand over his and saying, "I've got you," and knowing, beyond the bureaucratic ink and the pitying nurse. Promises made in fluorescent light still counted. "I used to teach," Mag said, and her voice threaded through the chop of conversation without effort. "I still do sometimes. You don't stop being something because your pay stub goes quiet." Chloe pressed her thumb twice into Maggie's knee, proud. Lena's smile did not slip, but it lost its appetite. "Of course," she said, "but you don't have to anymore, that's my point." "And that is your point," Mag agreed, as if they were working on the same essay. That someone's value is what you can outsource to them, or what they can relieve you from needing to learn. A few heads turned at the far end of the table. The server poured more wine to create a distraction. Ethan laughed easy. "Mom, come on, it's a party." "It is," Mag said. She rinsed her throat with water. Ethan, do you remember your third grade science project? The one on cranes, birds, and machines? We built the pulley in the garage. He grinned automatically, caught in a pleasant reflex. Yeah, we used Dad's socket set and cardboard. Twine, Maggie added. You wanted to prove that leverage mattered more than muscle. Okay, this is cute, Lean said, not unkindly, but the word cute is a velvet rope. Maggie turned her head. She kept her voice soft because soft travels farther. Leverage is not love, Lena, and providing is not the same as honoring. Men are not good for what they buy, and mothers are not done when their children start signing checks. Room did the subtle thing rooms do when a center of gravity shifts. A few chairs squeaked. A few phones face down. The sound system hummed, unsure of its role. Lena blinked. I was just saying. I know, Maggie said. She took no pleasure in the interruption. Teachers learn to stop a small fire before it takes the curtains. And I'm just saying that if you're going to tell a story about my life, at least finish the sentence. Ethan raised his palms. Snicker and star. All right, let's not, tonight's about the wins. We'll keep the heavy stuff for Thanksgiving, yeah? He shot a practiced grin down the table. Laughter came grateful, collective. Maggie inhaled once more, a count of 4. The cake would come soon. The room would go dim so the candles could do their job. She could ride this out. She had ridden out worse. But the hinge in her kept swinging, and the air on the other side smelled like rain. The lights lowered, the phones lifted. Faces turned toward Ethan's wish. Maggie watched the small flames wobble in steady trembling, then sure. The usual course began, make a wish, and Ethan held up an index finger, the universal sign for wait, I have a line. He looked at his mother the way ambitious sons are taught to, fondly, from a height. To my mother, he said, and paused for effect. Taught me that you can do anything if someone else believes in you enough to not get in your way. Laughter landed like confetti. Lena leaned toward Maggie with a smile you could frame. See, you don't have to do anything tonight, she murmured, sweet as frosting. Just sit there and be proud. Ethan takes care of us all. This time, Chloe's hand missed Maggie's knee and found her hand instead. She squeezed so hard it hurt. Maggie did not pull away. She did not correct the grammar of the compliment or the theology of the toast. She stared into the small city of candles, each wick a spine, each flame a tongue. When Ethan blew them out, the room whooped, a wind that felt like erasure. But in the dark second before the overhead lights returned, Maggie caught her own reflection in the black glass of the window and recognized, not a lamp, but a match. It takes one bright insult to start a burn. It takes a lifetime of quiet kindling to feed it. Lights rose, the camera flash popped. And somewhere inside her, where memory and promise talk in private, Maggie made a wish of her own, not for Ethan, not for Lena, not even for the past she had performed so faithfully. She wished for a sentence she had never allowed herself to finish. She wished to stop being careful. The cake had barely cooled when Maggie found herself standing in the quiet of her kitchen, rinsing frosting from the knife. Laughter from the restaurant still rang faintly in her ears, ghost-like and sharp around the edges. She should have been tired, but her hands trembled with the small, restless movements that come after you've swallowed too much silence. The sink water ran hot, steaming her glasses until the world blurred. Through that fog, her reflection looked younger somehow, less lined, more sure. Maybe that was memory's trick. It polished pain until it resembled purpose. Turned off the tap and pressed both palms against the counter. Just be proud, Lena had said. The words clung to her like the smell of smoke after a bad dinner. For years, Maggie had built her life around being proud of someone else. It started long before Ethan's shiny firm or Lena's curated smiles, long before the idea that motherhood was supposed to end once your children found bigger stages. She still remembered the first classroom she ever owned. 104 Jefferson Middle School. Cinderblock walls painted butter yellow, posters curling at the edges from too many summers of humidity. 27 kids, half of them rowdy, half shy, all of them carrying something heavier than their backpacks. Maggie had been 24 and believed that teaching was a kind of faith, planting seeds in weather you couldn't control. That was before the diagnosis, before hospitals and morphine and her husband's voice thinning to a whisper. Collins had been 48 when the cough turned to cancer. Maggie had graded essays beside his hospital bed, red pen trembling over paragraphs about dream jobs. She'd smiled through PTA meetings and parent-teacher conferences while learning the language of oncology, words like metastases and palliative that sounded almost polite until you understood them. She remembered the night he called her Magpie, the name he'd used when they were young and wild. Before kids and bills, his hand had been so light in hers it barely felt real. Promise me, he said, eyes clouded from the meds. For happens, you make sure they finish school, both of them, you give them the life we talked about. I promise. Promises are strange creatures, they outlive the people who make them. When John died, the house went silent in a way even clocks respected. Ethan was 15 then, all bone and ambition. Chloe was 10, thin as a sigh. Maggie had held them both that night until her arms cramped. The next morning, she put on her black suit and went to the bank to refinance the house. Next 5 years, she lived in survival increments, paychecks, tuition bills, late notices. She cooked in bulk, stretched leftovers, mended jeans until the pats had patches. Ethan took on part-time jobs, and Chloe learned how to braid her own hair before school. They became a trio of endurance. There was one winter, the hard one, when the boiler broke and the snow came early, when Maggie pawned her wedding ring. She told the kids she'd lost it washing dishes. Ethan had searched the drain with a flashlight for hours, blaming himself for not fixing the leak sooner. She never corrected him. It seemed crueler to tell the truth. Still, she remembered the kindnesses that arrived in unexpected packaging. Mrs. Garvey from next door, leaving groceries on the porch with a note that said, too much pasta for one person. Principal quietly adding an extra $100 to her check labeled substitution pay, even though she hadn't substituted that week. The janitor who fixed her car heater with duct tape and prayer. They'd all kept her going, those small mercies that reminded her the world could still be good. By the time Ethan graduated high school, Maggie had aged 20 years. She remembered standing in the bleachers, clapping until her palms stung, watching him walk across the stage in that wrinkled blue gown. His smile then, pure, unfiltered pride, had been worth every night she'd fallen asleep grading papers by the glow of a single lamp. He had hugged her afterward, his gown rustling like tissue paper. You did it, Mom. No, she corrected, laughing through tears. You did. Maybe that was the beginning of the myth, the one where she became a supporting character in her own story. Ethan needed her to be the selfless mother. Tireless believer. It was easier to see her that way than to admit how much she'd built herself from the rubble. Chloe, meanwhile, grew restless. She hated the town, the pitying looks. She wanted city lights and noise that drowned out grief. When she left for art school in Chicago, Maggie had packed her bags and pretended not to notice the relief in her daughter's voice. The first night alone, Maggie walked through the house like an intruder. Every room carried a ghost. John humming while he painted the hallway, Ethan practicing speeches in the mirror, Chloe photographing the family cat with her cheap camera. It was too quiet to breathe. She filled the space with work, volunteering, tutoring, anything that made her useful. The church food bank, the library reading program. She told herself it was noble, but the truth was simpler. It hurt less to give than to need. Sometimes she thought about returning to teaching full-time, but the energy it required felt like an amount she couldn't climb. Instead, she stayed in motion. She became the dependable neighbor, the helpful friend, the woman everyone thanked but no one really saw. Ethan called one night from college, his voice electric. He'd landed an internship at a finance firm in New York. Mom, this is it. This is how it starts. And Maggie had smiled into the phone, ignoring the ache of missing him already. I knew it would be. From there, life picked up speed. Ethan climbed fast, first promotions, then investments, then a wife who looked like she belonged on magazine covers. He sent postcards from Europe, blurry photos of sunsets and graffiti always unsigned. Mag collected them in a shoebox. The house stayed quiet. Too quiet? It wasn't until Ethan and Lena moved back to Chicago that she started believing maybe the quiet would end. He'd bought a house across town and insisted she retire early. You've done enough, Mom. Enjoy life. It sounded like gratitude. It was really dismissal. Retirement, it turned out. Rest, it was erasure. The world shrank to doctor appointments and grocery aisles, polite invitations that felt like obligations. She learned to smile through them, to nod at the right times, to keep stories short so no one got uncomfortable. Sometimes late at night, she'd take out the old grade book from her teaching days, names written in her looping cursive, notes in the margins, excellent progress. Needs encouragement. Bright mind, quiet soul. Run her finger down the columns, wondering if any of them remembered her. That was the thing about motherhood and teaching, two jobs that teach you to vanish so others can be seen. Now, standing in her kitchen after Ethan's party, she realized she had been invisible for so long that she'd started mistaking it for peace. Outside, the streetlights hummed. She poured herself tea and sat at the table, seeing the faint burn mark in the wood where John had once set down a pan too hot. That scar had outlasted them both. She thought of Ethan's laugh tonight, Lena's polished cruelty, Chloe's quiet loyalty. 3 generations of choices pressed into one evening. For a moment, she let herself imagine what it would feel like to stop apologizing for surviving. Her phone buzzed, a text from Chloe. You okay? Maggie typed yes, just tired. Love you, then deleted it. Typed again, I'm fine, don't worry about me. She hit send, then stared at the glowing screen. Somewhere deep inside her, a whisper she hadn't heard in years stirred awake. With the same voice that had guided her through lesson plans, hospital corridors, and long nights alone. It said, you promised John you'd give them a good life. You never promised to disappear from it. The kettle clicked as it cooled. Maggie lifted her cup, inhaled the steam, and made another kind of promise, one meant only for herself this time. Tomorrow, she would start soaring through the old boxes in the attic. There were things up there she hadn't touched since John died, papers, photos, maybe even letters. The past had always been her burden. Maybe it was time to make it her weapon. Sipped her tea slowly. Outside, the snow began to fall, soft, steady, and mercilessly clean. Morning came gray and slow, as if the sun itself hesitated to enter her house. Maggie woke before the alarm, though she hadn't needed one in years. The habit of early rising had been etched into her long ago, first by lesson plans, later by hospital visits, and now by the quiet ache of routine. She made coffee the same way she always did, 1 spoon too strong. Dash of milk, never sugar. The boxes in the attic waited. She told herself she'd only look through a few, just enough to satisfy the restless stirring that had followed her all night. But once she started, the hours fell away. Dust motes drifted in the thin sunlight like tiny ghosts of all the lives she'd lived inside the house. The first box was full of lesson binders. American literature, grade 8, women writers, and the modern voice. She opened one and found an old essay written by Ethan in 7th grade. The title read, My Hero, My Mom. The handwriting was crooked, the spelling imperfect. My mom never gives up, even when she's tired, even when people forget to thank her. She smiled, an involuntary, tender reflex, and then felt the weight of what came after. Somewhere between that paper and last night's dinner party, she had become the kind of mother her own son apologized for. The second box was heavier, full of John's things, his cufflinks. The service medals from his years as an EMT, a photo of the two of them in front of their first car, both squinting against the sunlight. He had his arm around her shoulder. She remembered the way that felt steady grounding. She placed the photo aside carefully as if it might still bruise. By afternoon, she'd lost track of time. When the phone rang, she jumped. Mom, Ethan's voice came bright, efficient, already halfway through a to-do list. Can you stop by the house tomorrow? Lena's redecorating the guest room. We're thinking of using your old dresser unless you still need it. My dresser? The oak one from Dad's room, it's classic. Lena wants to refinish it. You said you didn't mind, right? She hadn't said that. She'd only said it was heavy. Sure, Maggie answered, the word dry in her throat, if it helps. Perfect, Ethan said, cheerful again. And maybe you can make your lasagna for Sunday. Lena's friends are coming. She said everyone loves your homey touch. Homey touch. Maggie imagined the phrase printed on a scented candle. I'll see what I can do. He had already hung up. She stared at the phone a long moment before setting it down. Then she laughed softly, not from humor but recognition. This was how distance grew, not with fights but with polite agreements that erased you one favor at a time. That evening, Chloe called. Hey, Ma. Her voice came warm, unfiltered, still carrying that blend of Sid chaos and heartache. You survived the party, barely. I saw Lean's post, Chloe said. Captioned it family goals. The comments were full of heart emojis. It was nauseating. Maggie smiled. Don't start trouble. I'm not starting, I'm observing. You look tired. Just long day, honey, nothing new. A pause hummed between them. Mag could picture Chloe in her cluttered studio apartment, bare feet on paint-splattered floorboards, camera hanging from her neck. She was always chasing stories through her lens. Never her own. You know, Chloe said softly, I used to think you stayed because you were scared, but maybe you stayed because you believed you could fix everything. I did believe that, Mag said. That's what mothers do. We try to hold the pieces until everyone stops running. Did it work? No, Mag said with a faint laugh, but I held them anyway. The next morning, Mag drove to Ethan's house. The neighborhood was new, manicured lawns. Driveways, mailboxes that matched like uniforms. It smelled like new money and bleach. Lena greeted her at the door with a smile that could have been printed. Maggie, you're early? Perfect. The decorators in the back. We're thinking of a rustic modern look, something that feels nostalgic but not dated. Nostalgic but not dated. The words landed like an accusation. She followed Lena inside. The house gleamed, white and gold, every surface curated for admiration. Could tell no one really lived here. Not the way people lived when they kicked off their shoes and laughed too loud. This house was photographed pretending to be a home. The dresser's upstairs, Lena said. Oh, and if you don't mind, can we take that quilt too? The blue one from your guest room? It'll look perfect with the new palette. Maggie hesitated. That quilt was hand-stitched. Took me months. Lena blinked, smiling as though she hadn't heard the no inside the sentence. What makes it special? As they climbed the stairs, Ethan's voice echoed from his office. He was on a call pacing. No, don't worry about the numbers, just move the funds before Friday. We'll smooth it over next quarter. Something in his tone, sharp practice, made Mag stop. He had John's confidence, but none of his calm. He turned, spotted her, and muted the phone. Hey, Mom, didn't hear you come in. You're busy, she said, glancing toward the open laptop on his desk. Spreadsheets, bank statements, a file labeled Fitzgerald Fund Pending. Closed it with one hand, smiling too quickly. Just work stuff. Lena's dragging you into her design projects again? She just wants the dresser. Well, good, that thing's been sitting forever, you should declutter anyway, minimalism's good for the mind. The irony made her laugh quietly. Is it? He looked puzzled. What? Nothing. She forced a smile. You sound like a man who's never spent a winter in a half-heated house. Frowned the way people do when reminded of inconvenient history. Mom, can we not bring up the struggle years? I'm trying to build something better here. For who? She asked. For all of us, he said too fast, but Maggie wasn't sure he knew who us was anymore. Driving home, she noticed how far his world was from hers, how even the air in his neighborhood felt filtered. She remembered the promise she'd made to John, one that had built her whole life, give them a good future. She had kept it perhaps too well. In giving them everything, she had trained them to believe she had nothing left to give. That night, she sat at the kitchen table again, the same tea cooling beside her. She opened her laptop, found the folder of scanned letters from John's illness. She hadn't read them in years. The third letter stopped her. It was written in his messy, hurried handwriting. If the kids ever forget who you are, mind them. Remind them that before you were their mother, you were Maggie, the woman who built things with her hands and fixed them when they broke. Don't let them mistake silence for peace. Maggie stared at the words until they blurred. The distance between her and her children wasn't just physical. It was built from all the times she'd chosen quiet over confrontation, gratitude over truth. She closed the laptop, sat back, and let the stillness of the house fill her. She whispered aloud to no one in particular. I'm still here. The words sounded strange, but solid, as if the walls themselves needed reminding. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the old windows like fingertips asking to be let in. For the first time in years, Maggie didn't reach for the curtains. She let the cold air move through the cracks, unfiltered and real. Morning came gray and slow, as if the sun itself hesitated to enter her house. Maggie woke before the alarm, though she hadn't needed one in years. The habit of early rising had been etched into her long ago, first by lesson plans, later by hospital visits, and now by the quiet ache of routine. She made coffee the same way she always did. One spoon too strong, dash of milk, never sugar. The boxes in the attic waited. She told herself she'd only look through a few, just enough to satisfy the restless stirring that had followed her all night. But once she started, the hours fell away. The smokes drifted in the thin sunlight like tiny ghosts of all the lives she'd lived inside this house. The first box was full of lesson binders, American literature, grade 8, women writers in the modern voice. She opened one and found an old essay written by Ethan in 7th grade. The title read, My Hero, My Mom. The handwriting was crooked, the spelling imperfect. My mom never gives up, even when she's tired, even when people forget to thank her. She smiled, an involuntary, tender reflex, and then felt the weight of what came after. Or between that paper and last night's dinner party, she had become the kind of mother her own son apologized for. The second box was heavier, full of John's things, his cufflinks, the service medals from his years as an EMT, a photo of the two of them in front of their first car, both squinting against the sunlight. He had his arm around her shoulder. She remembered the way that felt steady, grounding. She placed the photo aside carefully as if it might still bruise. Afternoon, she'd lost track of time. When the phone rang, she jumped. Mom, Ethan's voice came bright, efficient, already halfway through a to-do list. Can you stop by the house tomorrow? Lena's redecorating the guest room. We're thinking of using your old dresser unless you still need it. My dresser? The oak one from Dad's room. It's classic. Lena wants to refinish it. You said you didn't mind, right? She hadn't said that. She'd only said it was heavy. Sure. Maggie answered, the word dry in her throat, if it helps. Perfect, Ethan said, cheerful again. And maybe you can make your lasagna for Sunday. Lena's friends are coming. She said everyone loves your homey touch. Homey touch. Maggie imagined the phrase printed on a scented candle. I'll see what I can do. He had already hung up. She stared at the phone a long moment before setting it down. Then she laughed softly, not from humor but recognition. It was how distance grew, not with fights but with polite agreements that erased you one favor at a time. That evening, Chloe called. Hey Ma, her voice came warm, unfiltered, still carrying that blend of Sid chaos and heartache. You survived the party? Barely. I saw Lean's post, Chloe said. Captioned it family goals. The comments were full of heart emojis. It was nauseating. Maggie smiled. Don't start trouble. I'm not starting, I'm observing. Look tired? Just long day, honey, nothing new? A pause hummed between them. Mag could picture Chloe in her cluttered studio apartment, bare feet on paint-splattered floorboards, camera hanging from her neck. She was always chasing stories through her lens, but never her own. You know, Chloe said softly, I used to think you stayed because you were scared, but maybe you stayed because you believed you could fix everything. I did believe that, Mag said. That's what mothers do. We try to hold the pieces until everyone stops running. Did it work? No, Mag said with a faint laugh. But I held them anyway. The next morning, Mag drove to Ethan's house. The neighborhood was new, manicured lawns, stone driveways, mailboxes that matched like uniforms. It smelled like new money and bleach. Lena greeted her at the door with a smile that could have been printed. Maggie, you're early? Perfect. The decorators in the back. We're thinking of a rustic modern look, something that feels nostalgic but not dated. Nostalgic but not dated. The words landed like an accusation. She followed Lena inside. The house gleamed, white and gold, every surface curated for admiration. Mag could tell no one really lived here, not the way people lived when they kicked off their shoes and laughed too loud. This house was photographed pretending to be a home. The dresser's upstairs, Lena said. Oh, and if you don't mind, can we take that quilt too? The blue one from your guest room. Look perfect with the new palette. Maggie hesitated. That quilt was hand-stitched. Took me months. Lena blinked, smiling as though she hadn't heard the no inside the sentence. That's what makes it special? As they climbed the stairs, Ethan's voice echoed from his office. He was on a call pacing. No, don't worry about the numbers, just move the funds before Friday. We'll smooth it over next quarter. Something in his tone, sharp, practiced, made Mag stop. He had John's confidence, but none of his calm. He turned, spotted her, and muted the phone. Hey Mom, didn't hear you come in. You're busy, she said, glancing toward the open laptop on his desk. Spreadsheets, bank statements, a file labeled Fitzgerald Fund Pending. He closed it with one hand, smiling too quickly. Just work stuff. Lena's dragging you into her design projects again? She just wants the dresser. Well, good. Things been sitting forever, you should declutter anyway. Minimalism's good for the mind. The irony made her laugh quietly. Is it? He looked puzzled. What? Nothing. She forced a smile. You sound like a man who's never spent a winter in a half-heated house. He frowned the way people do when reminded of inconvenient history. Mom, can we not bring up the struggle years? I'm trying to build something better here. For who? She asked. For all of us. Said too fast, but Maggie wasn't sure he knew who us was anymore. Driving home, she noticed how far his world was from hers, how even the air in his neighborhood felt filtered. She remembered the promise she'd made to John, the one that had built her whole life, give them a good future. She had kept it perhaps too well. In giving them everything, she had trained them to believe she had nothing left to give. That night, she sat at the kitchen table again, the same tea cooling beside her. She opened her laptop, found the folder of scanned letters from John's illness. She hadn't read them in years. Third letter stopped her. It was written in his messy, hurried handwriting. If the kids ever forget who you are, remind them. Remind them that before you were their mother, you were Maggie, the woman who built things with her hands and fixed them when they broke. Don't let them mistake silence for peace. Maggie stared at the words until they blurred. The distance between her and her children was just physical. It was built from all the times she'd chosen quiet over confrontation. Gratitude over truth. She closed the laptop, sat back, and let the stillness of the house fill her. Then she whispered aloud to no one in particular, "I'm still here." The words sounded strange, but solid, as if the walls themselves needed reminding. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing against the old windows like fingertips asking to be let in. For the first time in years, Maggie didn't reach for the curtains. She let the cold air move through the cracks, unfiltered and real. Next few days passed in a slow blur of winter light and small noises, the groan of the old refrigerator, the tick of the wall clock, the creak of wood that had learned her footstep by heart. Mag filled the hours with errands that didn't matter, groceries, a visit to the pharmacy, folding laundry she'd already folded. She told herself she was keeping busy, but deep down she knew she was waiting for something to shift, to snap, to make all this silence mean something. It arrived on a Thursday, tucked in a cream envelope in her mailbox. The handwriting was unfamiliar, the kind that came from a professional hand used to contracts and signatures. Inside was a letter from Collins Capital Group. Dear Mrs. Collins, per our discussion with your son, Ethan Collins, we're informing you of the upcoming sale of your family property at 14 Maplewood Avenue. The sale is scheduled for February 18th. Contact our office regarding the transfer of remaining equity. Sincerely, Liddy Grant Real Estate Division. The letter trembled slightly in her hand. Maplewood Avenue, the old house, her house. The one where John had taken his last breath, where she had taught Ethan and Chloe to ride bikes on the cracked driveway. The one she had promised herself she'd never sell. She read it again. Per our discussion with your son. She hadn't had any discussion. The time she reached Ethan's office downtown, the air outside had turned sharp with February wind. The glass tower loomed above her, all steel and ambition, a monument to her son's success. Inside, everything smelled like money and expensive coffee. Receptionists spoke in the soft, clipped tones of people who didn't need to raise their voices to be heard. Do you have an appointment? The receptionist asked without looking up. I'm his mother. That made the woman glance up briefly. Sympathy flickered, the kind reserved for someone who'd shown up to the wrong kind of battlefield. Then appeared a few minutes later, smiling that same public smile that never reached his eyes. Mom, what are you doing here? You should have called. I got your letter, she said, holding it up. He blinked. Letter? From your company about Maplewood. His expression barely wavered, just a small tightening near the jawline. Oh, that. Yes, that. Her voice cracked the calm like ice underfoot. You're selling it. It's just property. You said yourself it's too big for you. The taxes are ridiculous. We can put the money into trust. It'll make more sense long term. I didn't say that, you did. He sighed, checking his watch. Please don't make this dramatic. Dramatic? She almost laughed. Ethan, your father built that house with his own hands. We planted the oak tree in the front yard together. He's buried 2 blocks from there. And he'd want you taken care of. Countered. This isn't betrayal, Mom. It's business. The word business landed like a slap. It always did when it came from his mouth. I don't want your business, she said quietly. I want honesty. Ethan looked past her out the window. You always get emotional about things that don't matter. Her breath caught. They matter to me. He rubbed the bridge of his nose, impatience blooming. Look, Mom, I've already signed the agreement. It's too late. Lena and I. Lena? She helped with staging. The house will sell fast that way. The air seemed to drain out of the room. Maggie could hear her pulse in her ears. You let her walk through that house, through our bedroom, without telling me? Mom, that's my life in those rooms, she whispered. Your father's life. He exhaled hard, as if he were the one being burdened. It's just walls and furniture. Don't turn it into a shrine. I stared at him for a long moment, this man she had raised, this boy she had once held in her arms after nightmares, whispering promises she thought were true. She could still see traces of that boy in him, in the way his shoulders hunched slightly when she was angry, in the faint scar on his chin from his first bike ride. But those pieces were fading under the weight of the man he had become. Finally, she said softly, you know, Ethan, sound just like the people who used to turn down your father's ambulance donations because they thought it was just charity. He used to tell me there are people who think kindness is weakness. They're wrong. Ethan's jaw clenched. This isn't about kindness. It's about responsibility. I'm doing what's best for everyone. Everyone but me, she said. He didn't answer. Maggie turned toward the door, gripping her purse like an anchor. You know what hurts most. You didn't even ask. You just assumed I'd say yes, like I always do. As she walked away, his voice followed her, clipped, frustrated. Don't make this harder than it is. She didn't turn back. It's already hard, Ethan. You just don't feel it yet. That night, Maggie drove to Maplewood. The house stood silent under the pale glow of the streetlight, the porch sagging slightly, the wind chimes tangled in winter's breath. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of dust and old memories. She walked room to room, the living room where John had built the bookcases, the kitchen where Ethan once painted the walls with tomato sauce, the hallway where Chloe's height marks still climbed up the frame. Every scuff, every scratch was a record of love's endurance. She ran her hand along the wall, whispering to the emptiness, they're selling you like a stock. The house didn't answer, but it didn't need to. In the corner of the dining room, old cedar chest sat half hidden under a sheet. Maggie knelt, pulled it open, and found the stack of John's journals she hadn't touched since the funeral. On top of them was a smaller box labeled estate documents. She lifted the lid. Inside were notarized papers, dated years earlier, amendments to John's will. He had left the Maplewood house in joint ownership, to Maggie and a charitable education trust he had established. Ethan's name appeared nowhere on it. Heart thudded, if Ethan had forged or bypassed those terms, the sale might not be legal. She sat back on her heels, her breath coming fast. For years she had told herself that survival meant peacekeeping, that keeping quiet was a kind of love, but looking at those papers she saw it clearly. Silence hadn't protected her family, it had fed their arrogance. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a message from Chloe. You home? She typed back slowly. Yes, at Maplewood. Brother's selling it? A pause, then Chloe's reply came quick and sharp. He what? Maggie smiled faintly through her tears. It's time, honey. I think your father left me something he didn't mean for Ethan to touch. Another text appeared. I'll come tomorrow. Don't do anything yet. But Maggie already knew tomorrow would be different. For the first time in years, she didn't feel tired. She felt awake, bone deep, electric awake. She gathered John's documents into her bag, locked the door behind her, and stood under the cold stars. The wind bit at her face, but she didn't flinch. Some betrayals cut so deep they bleed out the path itself. Others carve out the space where truth can finally breathe. This one she thought might be both. The next morning dawned bright and cruel, sunlight spilling through her kitchen window as if nothing had changed. Maggie sat at the table, the papers from John's box spread before her like an autopsy. Every seal, every signature confirmed the same truth. Ethan had no legal right to sell the Maplewood house. She would read the lines again and again, her pulse steady now, not with fear, but with focus. For years, she had been the keeper of everyone's calm, smoothing every argument before it could start, apologizing for storms she didn't make. But this was different. This was theft wrapped in family. At 9:00 a.m., her phone buzzed. Mom, Ethan said briskly, the way he always did when he wanted to control the conversation. I'm just confirming you'll be at the fundraiser tonight. Big night for the firm. Lena's been planning for weeks. I'll be there, Mag said evenly. Perfect. Just keep it light, all right? We'll have reporters, investors, that sort of crowd. No talk about Maplewood or whatever misunderstanding you think this is. Let me handle it. Of course, she said, her voice soft but sure. I wouldn't want to embarrass you. He didn't notice the edge in her tone. He never did. When the call ended, she folded the legal papers into her purse. It's been a lifetime watching Ethan perform for the world. His charm, his confidence, his ability to twist a lie into something that sounded like leadership. But tonight she would let him perform one last time. And then she would take back her voice. The fundraiser was held at the Wyndham Hotel downtown, all glass chandeliers and champagne light. The event was for the Collins Future Fund, a charity Ethan claimed supported underprivileged students in financial literacy. He knew better now. The trust's name matched the one listed in John's old documents. Ethan hadn't just stolen her house, he'd hijacked his father's legacy. When she arrived, heads turned politely, some out of recognition, some out of habit. She was Ethan's mother, after all, the woman who had once been featured in a local article years ago titled The Teacher Behind the Titan. Mom, Ethan called across the room, weaving through donors in tailored suits. Look fantastic, I'm glad you came. He kissed her cheek, careful not to smudge her lipstick. His cologne smelled sharp and cold, like ambition bottled for sale. Wouldn't miss it, she said. Lena appeared beside him, glittering in silver. Maggie, you're just in time for the press photos. She leaned closer, voice low. Let's make sure you're on Ethan's left, the lighting's better for his good side. Maggie smiled. Don't worry, dear, I'm done standing in bad light. Ina blinked, unsure if it was a joke. Ethan clinked his glass, calling the room to attention. Friends, colleagues, family, thank you for being here tonight. The Collins Future Fund represents what we stand for: legacy, opportunity, and integrity. The crowd applauded, cameras flashed. Maggie stood near the edge of the platform, her pulse steady. Her heart didn't pound, it sharpened. Ethan continued, this fund was inspired by my late father, a man of principle and service. His work as an EMT showed me that true success comes from giving back. Now we're expanding his vision through our firm's partnership with several community trusts. Maggie's voice cut through the room, calm but unyielding, including one he didn't create. The crowd's applause faltered. Ethan froze. Mom, what are you? She stepped onto the small stage beside him, her posture straight, her voice clear enough to echo off the crystal. I won't take long. I just want to correct a small detail. She reached into her purse and unfolded a single document, the old trust agreement, John's signature still visible in faded ink. This was your father's real legacy, the Maplewood Education Trust. It was meant for scholarships, not shell companies. It was never for your firm to expand, and certainly not for you to sell the house that funded it. The silence was immediate and electric. Ethan's face flushed red. Mom, not here. This isn't the time. It's exactly the time, she said, her tone calm as winter air. You wanted the spotlight. I'm just adjusting where it shines. Murmurs rippled through the room. The investors, mostly men Ethan's age and older, shifted uncomfortably. Lena's hand gripped Ethan's arm. Mom, you don't understand the complexity. I understand theft, she said softly, and arrogance, and pretending betrayal is business. A few gasps scattered through the crowd. Someone lowered their camera. Maggie turned toward the guests. My husband built that fund to help children who couldn't afford books. My son turned it into a headline. There's a difference between charity and self-promotion. Ethan stepped forward, his voice tightening. You're making a mistake. You're destroying everything we've built. We? Maggie's eyes glimmered under the chandelier light. No, Ethan, you built this without me, and now you can live with it without me. He handed the document to a reporter near the front row. You'll want to verify that signature. It's public record. The crowd erupted, voices rising, questions firing, cameras pivoted, flashbulbs popped like small explosions. Ethan reached for her arm, his voice dropping to a whisper. What the hell are you doing? What you taught me, she said, looking out for my family, just not the way you expected. Then she walked off the stage, outside. Night air hit her like freedom. For a long moment, she stood beneath the marquee lights, breathing, letting the noise of the city wash over her. Her phone buzzed in her purse. It was Chloe. I saw the live stream. You actually did it. Maggie smiled faintly. Yes, your brother will hate me for a while. Good, maybe he'll finally feel something real. Maggie looked up at the skyline, the cold, glittering towers her son had worshipped. Somewhere inside one of those, his empire was beginning to crack. A limousine door opened behind her. Lena stepped out, her voice tight. Do you have any idea what you've done? Maggie turned, her expression calm. I told the truth, it's overdue. You've ruined Ethan's reputation, everything he's worked for. No, Mag said, cutting her off. He ruined it himself. I just stopped cleaning up the mess. Lena's lips trembled, not from guilt but fury. You'll regret this. Maggie looked at her for a long, quiet moment. Maybe, but at least I'll remember who I am. Then she walked into the cold night, each step firm, measured. The city hummed around her, indifferent and alive. It didn't feel broken. She felt lighter, as if she'd been carrying her family's sins in her lungs and had finally exhaled. For the first time in years, Mag Collins wasn't just surviving someone else's story. She was writing her own. The next morning began with the sound of silence, the kind that follows a storm, thick and waiting. Maggie sat at her kitchen table again, cup of untouched coffee cooling beside her. Phone vibrating endlessly across the table like a trapped insect. She didn't need to look to know who it was. Ethan, then Lena, then an unknown number she suspected belonged to someone from Collins Capital's PR department. She didn't answer any of them. Instead, she opened her laptop. The news had already found her. Breaking, Collins Capital fundraiser erupts in scandal, founder's mother accuses firm of misusing family trust. Below it, a photo Maggie. Sentence holding John's document under the chandelier light. Ethan beside her, face frozen between a smile and a glare. She clicked play on the video. Her own voice filled the kitchen, calm and unwavering. You wanted the spotlight. I'm just adjusting where it shines. Watching it felt like seeing someone else, a woman she hadn't met yet but had been becoming for years. She closed the laptop and exhaled. The house felt different this morning. Lighter. It finally recognized her. Then a knock on the door. When she opened it, Chloe stood there, hair messy from travel, camera strap still looped around her neck. Mom, sweetheart. Chloe dropped her bag, crossed the threshold, and wrapped her arms around her mother. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hug wasn't dramatic. It was grounding, two roots finding each other in the same soil after years apart. I watched it 3 times, Chloe said. Back just enough to look at her. You were incredible. Mag gave a small, tired smile. I didn't feel incredible, just done. That's what power looks like, Chloe said. Being done. They sat in the living room, sunlight catching the dust like snowflakes. Maggie told her everything, the letter from the real estate division, the documents she found in John's chest, the fundraiser, the look on Ethan's face when she said theft. Chloe listened without interruption, her eyes sharp and wet. He's gone too far this time. He's not gone, Maggie said softly. He's lost, there's a difference. Mom, Chloe said, shaking her head. Keep saying that like it's your job to find him. I'm his mother. That doesn't mean you're his compass. Maggie looked down at her hands. They were steady, but she could still feel the tremor of yesterday's adrenaline beneath the skin. Maybe not, she said, but I taught him to walk straight. If he's veered off, I can't help wondering if I handed him the wrong map. Chloe reached across the couch and took her hand. No, Mom, you handed him everything. He just stopped looking where he was going. That afternoon, Maggie drove to the old Maplewood house. Reporters had started gathering outside Ethan's office downtown. She'd seen the photos online, so she knew she wouldn't find him there. But she wasn't looking for Ethan. She was looking for peace. The oak tree in front of the old house stood bare, branches skeletal against the pale sky. She unlocked the front door and stepped inside, the familiar creak greeting her like an old friend. Everything was exactly as she'd left it 2 nights ago. The same sunlight slanted through the curtains, the same faint scent of cedar and dust. But there on the dining table was something new, a sealed envelope, her name on the front in Ethan's handwriting. Her first instinct was anger, then curiosity, then something quieter, grief. She tore it open. Inside, a single page written hastily. Mom, I don't know what you think you've uncovered, but you've made a mess. Papers you have, you're misunderstanding them. I was trying to expand Dad's fund, not steal it. Everything I did was to honor him. Maybe I made mistakes, but you didn't have to humiliate me. You've destroyed my career. Lean's furious. Investors are pulling out. I hope you're happy. You wanted to be seen, and now you are. But don't expect me to come running when this all blows back on you. You made your choice. Don't contact me until you're ready to apologize. Then Maggie read it twice. The first time she felt her chest tighten, that familiar old reflex of guilt, the one she carried for decades whenever her children hurt. The second time she felt something else, clarity. He was angry because she'd broken the one rule he'd inherited from the world, that men could sin as long as they smiled while doing it, and mothers would stay quiet for the sake of peace. But she wasn't that kind of mother anymore. She folded the letter carefully, stepped back in the envelope, and slipped it into her coat pocket. Then she walked upstairs to John's old study. The room still smelled faintly of tobacco and old books. She sat at the desk and pulled out a clean sheet of stationery, the same kind John had used when he wrote her letters from the hospital. She wrote slowly, deliberately, each word a line in the sand. Ethan, I don't need to be right, and I don't need you to be perfect. But I won't apologize for telling the truth. What you call humiliation, I call honesty. Kind of honesty your father lived by, and I've spent my life teaching. You built your world on his name, and now you'll have to answer to what that name really meant. If you want redemption, it's yours for the taking, but not at the cost of silence. You're my son, Ethan, and I love you. That hasn't changed, but love without accountability is just permission. Mom. She folded it, sealed it, and left it on the table where his letter had been. Before she left, she opened the window. Cold air swept through the room, stirring the curtains. It felt cleansing, almost sacred. That evening, Chloe found her sitting on the porch steps, wrapped in John's old jacket. Did he write? Yes, and he's angry, but anger's just grief in a loud costume. Chloe sat beside her. What now? Maggie looked at the horizon, where the sun dipped low, painting the world in gold and ash. Now I wait, she said. I protect what's left of your father's name. The rest will fall how it must. For a moment, neither spoke. The air smelled faintly of frost and wood smoke. Chloe leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. You know, Mom, that thing you said last night about finally being done, I think you've just started. Maggie smiled, eyes fixed on the distance. Maybe so. Inside the house, the floorboards creaked as if agreeing, and for the first time in a long, long while, Maggie didn't feel like a woman waiting to be rescued. She felt like the storm that had finally learned to move. 2 days passed before the city stopped calling her name. The reporters outside her driveway had thinned, the phones rang less, and the storm of attention around the Collins Fund scandal slowly shifted from shock to speculation. Headlines faded as quickly as they'd come. But inside Maggie's small house, everything was still humming. Her itself seemed to have changed, sharper, somehow, alive with the pulse of something new. Not chaos, not fear. Freedom. She spent that morning sitting at her dining table, surrounded by folders, papers, and the quiet whir of her old laptop. Chloe had offered to help, but Maggie had insisted on doing this part alone. For years, she'd let Ethan's world run unchecked, the accountants, the investors, the advisors with slick smiles and vague answers. Now that she had unearthed the truth, she wanted to understand it. Line by line, dollar by dollar. At first, the spreadsheets made her dizzy, transfers, shell accounts, dates, tax references, all tangled like roots beneath a poison tree. But slowly, as she worked, the picture sharpened. Money from the Maplewood Education Trust had been redirected through at least 3 companies before it reached the firm's philanthropic division. One of them was registered in the Cayman Islands. Another bore the name Whitestone Holdings. She typed it into a search bar and froze. Whitestone Holdings LLC registered agent, Ethan Collins. Her son's name printed right there in public record. She didn't cry, she didn't even feel angry. Only a quiet, steady certainty it's time to act. That afternoon, she made an appointment with a man named David Harper. He was a financial lawyer in his 30s, recently returned to town after years in D.C. His mother, Jean, had been Maggie's teaching assistant years ago, bright, reliable. The kind of person who'd send Christmas cards, even after changing dates. 3 days later, David called. We've filed the injunction, he said. Until the investigation is complete, your son's firm can't touch the Maplewood assets. And Mrs. Collins? Yes, there's more. The trust public filings list an auxiliary account in your husband's name that hasn't been accessed in over a decade. It still holds roughly $200,000, untouched. Maggie blinked. What? It's legitimate. With the last uncorrupted piece of your husband's work, you have full authority over it. She pressed a hand over her heart, overwhelmed. John left it. He must have known one day we'd need it. David's voice softened. Seems he trusted you to finish what he started. When the call ended, Maggie sat in stillness, the sound of her own heartbeat steady and alive. She walked to the window, watching snow drift across the street in slow spirals. City outside was noisy, impatient, but here, inside her small kitchen, she felt the quiet strength of a woman who had finally stopped asking permission to exist. Chloe entered, rubbing her eyes. Mom, what is it? Mag turned to her, a rare light in her eyes. Hope, she said simply. That night, she opened one of John's old journals again. Near the back was an entry dated 2 months before he died. Magpie, I know you'll keep building even when I'm gone. World will try to convince you that survival is small, but it's not. It's sacred. When they tell you to be quiet, remember, even a whisper can move mountains if it's true. She ran her fingers over the page, her heart steady. For years, she had survived quietly. Now she was ready to live loudly. Mag closed the journal, straightened her spine, and whispered to the empty house. I'm not surviving anymore, John. I'm coming back. House seemed to exhale, the kind of sound old walls make when they've been waiting too long for laughter. And somewhere beyond the snow-covered streets of Chicago, the world began to stir, unaware that one mother, 56 and unafraid, had just remembered how to fight. The morning the injunction went public, Maggie's phone started ringing again, But this time, the voices on the other end were not reporters. They were lawyers, accountants, whistleblowers, people who had worked for Ethan's firm and suddenly decided they had a conscience. David Harper called first. His tone carried both gravity and satisfaction. Mrs. Collins, he said, your son's world is unraveling faster than we expected. Once the court order hit, a few partners jumped ship. One of them sent over internal emails. They confirm everything: fund diversions, forged filings, even falsified donation records. Maggie didn't flinch. She had run out of shock. Then we give it to the authorities? That's already in motion, David said. But there's more. There's a press conference tomorrow. The state's financial ethics board will make a statement. They're naming names. Thins? Yes, he hesitated. You don't have to attend. Maggie smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. Yes, David, I do. That evening she sat at the same dining table where just a week earlier she'd opened Ethan's letter of anger and denial. Now the table was covered in something else entirely: evidence. Printed emails, bank statements, copies of filings with Ethan's digital signature. The truth spread out like a battlefield map. Chloe came in, balancing 2 mugs of tea. It's official, she said, placing one in front of her mother. The story's gone national. CNN's got your name trending. Not exactly the kind of fame I imagined, Maggie said. Chloe smiled softly. It's just Mom, that's rare. Maggie took a sip of tea. It tasted like chamomile and courage. Just feels different than I thought. Less triumphant, more quiet. Chloe leaned against the table. Quiet's fine. Quiet's honest. Maggie nodded, but her eyes drifted to the window. Outside, snow was falling again, soft, relentless, erasing everything it touched. The next day, the press gathered in the marble lobby of the state courthouse. Cameras lined the steps, microphones clustered like flowers on the podium. Maggie arrived alone, dressed in black and gray, simple but firm. Her calm drew as much attention as the scandal itself. When David met her by the entrance, he looked both nervous and proud. Sure about this? John always said truth isn't supposed to be convenient, she said. Let's do it. Inside, the Financial Ethics Board chair spoke first, summarizing months of investigation. Maggie stood behind him, listening as her son's name echoed through the atrium. Ethan Collins, principal of Collins Capital Group, under investigation for misappropriation of trust funds, tax fraud, and falsification of charitable records. Each word landed like a hammer. But instead of pain, Mag felt a strange, right stillness. When the chair finished, the reporters swarmed. Mrs. Collins, do you have a comment? Do you regret your decision to expose your son? Are you afraid of the fallout? Maggie stepped forward, her voice low but unshakable. A mother's job is to raise her children to do good. But when they stop knowing what good means, a mother's job is to remind them. Ethan forgot. I didn't. The flashbulbs exploded in light. Do you still love your son? Someone shouted. She met the question head on. Of course. That's why I told the truth. For a second, there was silence. Then the questions started again, overlapping, chaotic, but Maggie didn't hear them. She was already walking away, the sound of her heels steady against the marble. That night, Ethan called. His voice was hoarse, desperate, stripped of its old polish. How could you do this to me? He demanded. I didn't do anything to you, Ethan, she said quietly. You did this to yourself. Seizing my accounts. Lena's left. The firm's collapsing. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Yes, she said. It feels like the moment I signed away my retirement to pay your tuition. It feels like the moment I watched your father die and still had to make dinner for 2 children who didn't understand why the world was unfair. I know exactly what it feels like, Ethan. You just never thought it could happen to you. He was silent on the other end then. Or Mom, I didn't mean for it to go this far. No one ever does, she said, but consequences don't need your permission. Please, he said finally, don't testify. Mag closed her eyes. Ethan, I already have. The line went dead. 2 days later, Chloe drove her mother downtown. The courthouse loomed again, but this time the crowd was larger. Inside, Ethan was being questioned by federal auditors. Building buzzed with the tension of a man who'd finally run out of versions of the truth. Maggie waited in the hallway outside the hearing room. Through the frosted glass, she could see his outline, rigid, exhausted, unraveling. He looked smaller than she remembered. Chloe reached over and squeezed her hand. You don't have to watch this. I do, Mag said softly, because I need to see what it costs when love becomes blindness. Sat there for an hour while the questions droned and the truth bled out. When Ethan finally emerged, flanked by lawyers, his eyes found hers instantly. He froze. For a moment, the years between them collapsed. He wasn't a disgraced financier and she wasn't a whistleblower. He was just her son, frightened and lost. Mom, he whispered. She stood. I'm here. His lip trembled. I'm sorry. Mag felt tears sting her eyes, but she didn't step forward. I know, she said. You're not saying it to me yet. You're saying it to fear. Say it to the truth when you're ready. Then she turned and walked away. That night as they drove home, Chloe broke the silence. He'll hate you for a while. Maybe, Mag said, but at least he'll have something real to hate me for. Chloe laughed softly. You're terrifying when you're calm. Maggie smiled. That's what 30 years of teaching middle school does. The road stretched ahead, endless and quiet, lined with streetlights flickering like small, stubborn stars. She looked out the window and thought about John, about the promises she had made, and about the woman she had become, one who no longer mistook endurance for love or silence for peace. For the first time since all of this began, Mag felt not just strong but whole. Somewhere inside her, beneath the exhaustion and sorrow, something had bloomed. Not revenge, not pride. Clarity. And it felt like sunlight after a very long winter. Snow had begun to melt when the world started rearranging itself. In the weeks after Ethan's downfall, Chicago shifted into an uneasy spring, the kind where puddles replaced ice, and the air carried the scent of thawing regret. Maggie could feel that change deep in her bones. The headlines grew colder. Ethan's story moved from breaking news to ongoing case, and soon, other scandals replaced it in the national cycle. But within their family, the aftershocks hadn't faded. Were quieter now, the kind that rumble beneath the surface, cracking old foundations. Maggie sat on the porch one afternoon, a blanket around her shoulders, a mug of coffee cooling beside her. Across the street, children were playing in the slush, their laughter bright and unburdened. She envied that sound. Her phone buzzed, text from Chloe. Mom, reporters keep emailing me. I'm ignoring them. How are you holding up? Better than expected. Worse than I admit. Allowed to be tired, you just brought down a whole empire. I didn't bring it down, Maggie typed. It was already hollow. I just knocked once and listened to it fall. She smiled faintly. Then her phone rang, unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something in her gut made her answer. Mrs. Collins? The voice on the other end was male, older, steady. This is Detective Harris with the State Financial Crimes Division. Wanted to inform you we've concluded our preliminary findings. Maggie's breath caught. And? There's enough evidence to proceed with charges. Your son has agreed to cooperate in exchange for a plea deal. He's naming other parties involved, including his managing partners. It's extensive. Mag closed her eyes. So it's done? For now, there'll be hearings, of course, but the core of it, yes, it's over. Thank you, she said quietly. Mrs. Collins. Dave added, his voice softer now. I've seen a lot of cases. Not many start because someone had the courage to speak up when it was family. You did the right thing. Maggie exhaled slowly after hanging up, the phone still warm in her palm. The right thing. The words should have felt like relief, but instead they sat heavy, bittersweet. Later that week, Chloe arrived with groceries and 2 bags of takeout. You're not living on coffee and cereal again, are you? She teased, dropping the food on the counter. Maybe, Mag said, smiling faintly. Chloe poured them both tea and sat down. Said Dad's trust will be restored, right? The real Maplewood Fund? Yes, David confirmed it yesterday. The accounts will reopen under a new board of trustees, educators, not investors. That's poetic, Chloe said. Dad would like that. Maggie nodded. He believed in teaching as much as he believed in saving lives. The two weren't that different to him. They ate in silence for a while, the kind of silence that isn't empty, just full of things too delicate for words. Finally, Chloe said, have you heard from Ethan? Maggie hesitated. No, not directly. David said he's in compliance meetings preparing statements. His lawyer reached out, asked if I'd be willing to write a letter for leniency at sentencing. Chloe froze, and I said I'd think about it. Mom, I know, Maggie interrupted gently. He doesn't deserve it, but justice isn't about what people deserve. It's about what they can become afterward. Chloe sighed. You're too good. No, Mag said softly. Just tired of being angry. That night, alone again, Maggie opened her old photo album. There was Ethan, age 5, holding up a misshapen birdhouse. His smile was toothless and proud. She traced her finger over the picture and whispered, you were good once, you can be again. She spent the next morning writing the letter, each word came slowly like an ache released. To whom it may concern, my name is Margaret Collins. I am Ethan Collins' mother. There's no defense for what my son did, and I will not offer one. But I believe redemption begins when a person finally stops performing and starts listening. I hope the process will make my son listen not to me, but to the voice he spent years drowning out, the one that knows right from wrong. I don't ask for leniency, I ask for fairness. Give him the chance to rebuild from truth, not illusion. That is what his father would have wanted. Sincerely, Margaret Collins. He sealed it without rereading. Some words didn't need polishing, they only needed to be said. A few days later, she met David at the courthouse. The sentencing hearing was brief, procedural. Ethan's plea deal spared him prison but left him bankrupt, barred from working in finance again. His face, pale and drawn, reminded her of a photograph left too long in the sun, familiar but faded. When the judge read the final decision, Maggie watched Ethan's shoulders sag, as though the weight of his own choices had finally caught up. Afterward, as people filed out, Ethan turned to her. For a long time, neither spoke. I thought I'd hate you forever, he said quietly. I know, but I don't. His voice cracked. I hate what I became. Maggie reached out, resting a hand on his arm. That's the beginning, Ethan, not the end. He nodded once, tears glinting in his eyes. What do I do now? Tell the truth, she said, every day. Even when it costs you. He swallowed hard. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Maybe not, she said. Forgiveness isn't something you deserve, it's something you decide to live up to. He tried to speak, but the bailiff was already calling his name. As he was led away, Mag felt a strange, peaceful ache. Her son was broken, yes, but maybe for the first time in years, he was finally honest. That evening, she and Chloe returned home. The house glowed warm with lamplight. On the kitchen table sat the reinstated trust papers, stamped and official. Maggie placed a hand on them and whispered, we did it, John. We poured wine, raising a glass. To Dad, she said softly. Mag clinked her glass, and to what's left of us. They drank in silence, watching the snow outside dissolve into rain. For the first time in a long, long while, the sound didn't remind Maggie of loss. It reminded her of cleansing. And deep down, she understood the storm had passed, but its water was what made the flowers grow. The weeks after Ethan's sentencing arrived quietly, almost suspiciously so. House no longer buzzed with phone calls or legal discussions. Reporters stopped showing up at her door. The story of the Collins Fund scandal was fading into the city's rearview mirror, just another morality tale buried beneath newer headlines. But for Maggie, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like air after a storm, heavy, still damp with memory, but breathable again. Each morning, she returned to a small ritual she had long abandoned. She brewed her coffee, opened the kitchen curtains, and wrote in her journal. It wasn't about events anymore. It was about healing. About the strange, uneven process of rebuilding a life that had been shattered not by disaster, but by truth finally spoken aloud. Her first entry after the hearing was simple. Grief doesn't leave when justice arrives, it just changes its name. One afternoon, she received a letter, not a legal one this time. It was handwritten, the envelope smudged and worn. She recognized the handwriting instantly, Ethan's. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Mom, I don't know where to start. Saying I'm sorry feels small compared to what I did, but it's all I have for now. The truth is, I believe my success was yours, that everything I achieved justified everything I took. I wanted to make you proud, but I didn't realize I'd stopped trying to make you safe. I hurt you and I hurt Dad's legacy. I can't undo that. I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure I never forget it. I've started volunteering with the community literacy program. It's not glamorous, but it feels real. They asked me to help teach budgeting to single mothers. Imagine that, me teaching ethics. But maybe this is where I'm supposed to start. You told me once that love without accountability is just permission. I finally understand what you meant. I love you, Mom. And I'm sorry I made you prove your strength by standing against me. Ethan. At the time she finished reading, her tears had already fallen onto the page, blurring the ink. But she didn't wipe them away. They belonged there, part of the record. Later that week, Maggie drove to the Maplewood Education Trust office. The new board had asked her to speak at their first meeting, to commemorate the reopening of the scholarship fund. The building wasn't large, but it was bright, with tall windows and shelves filled with books. Inside, a dozen volunteers sat around a table, listening as Maggie told the story, not of scandal or downfall, but of how families' mistakes had been turned into second chance for others. She ended her speech simply. This fund isn't about redemption. It's about continuation, the belief that doing right, even late, still matters. When she finished, they applauded softly. Not the kind of applause that follows a performance, but the quiet, steady sound of understanding. Afterward, one of the younger volunteers approached her, a woman in her 20s with a toddler in her arms. Mrs. Collins, she said shyly, I just wanted to thank you. I'm one of the first scholarship recipients. I start nursing school in the fall. Maggie smiled, her voice catching. Then maybe you'll be the one holding a life in your hands someday. The best repayment anyone could offer. The young woman hesitated, then added softly, I saw your speech on TV. It made me call my mom again. Something inside Maggie broke gently open. Then we've both done something right. That night back home, Chloe stopped by with her camera bag slung over her shoulder. I had a meeting today, she said, kicking off her boots. A friend from the Tribune wants to do a photo essay on women rebuilding after loss. Asked if they can feature you. Me? Maggie raised an eyebrow. I'm hardly rebuilding, I'm just continuing. Exactly, Chloe said, smiling. That's the point. She set up her camera near the window. The evening light poured through, golden and soft. Mag stood by the bookshelf holding one of John's journals. Don't pose, Chloe said. Just be. Maggie laughed softly. I don't know how to be for the camera. Yes, you do, Chloe replied gently. You've been doing it all along, surviving in plain sight. The shutter clicked once, then again. For the first time, Maggie didn't flinch at the sound of being seen. A week later, the photo appeared in the Tribune's weekend feature. The headline read, "The Courage to Stay Honest, A Mother's Quiet Revolution." The image was simple: Maggie by the window, her hand resting on an open journal, sunlight outlining her face like a halo. The caption read, "She didn't burn down her son's empire, she just stopped holding it up." People wrote letters, former students, nurses she'd taught years ago, and a few mothers who said her story had given them the courage to speak up in their own homes. The mailbox filled every morning. And each time Maggie opened a new envelope, she realized the truth of it. Silence had never been peace, it had just been distance. Now, finally, she was closing that distance between herself and her children, between past and present, between who she was and who she'd become. A Sunday evening, Maggie and Chloe drove out to the lake. The air smelled of rain and pine, and the sky burned in orange and violet streaks. Chloe set down a picnic blanket. "He called me yesterday," she said suddenly. "Ethan." Maggie looked up. "Oh?" "He said he's moving to Madison. He's teaching financial literacy classes at community college. It's small, but he sounded peaceful." Maggie nodded slowly. "That's good. To tell you he'll visit when he's ready." Maggie looked out over the lake, the water catching the last light of day. "When he's ready," she repeated softly. "That's enough." They sat together in the quiet, watching the sun disappear. The world didn't look new exactly, but it looked clean washed, softened, honest. As the wind rippled through the trees, Mag closed her eyes and whispered, almost like a prayer, "Thank you, John, for teaching me that love isn't about holding on, letting go, and watching them walk back when the road is theirs again." The waves answered with their gentle rhythm, steady and forgiving, and for the first time in years, Maggie didn't feel like she was surviving her family. She was living it fully, truthfully, and finally free. Spring arrived for real this time. Not the hesitant kind that teased the edges of winter, but the kind that committed: full blossoms, warm air, and light that lingered on porches long after dinner. For Mag Collins, it didn't feel like the start of a new life. It felt like coming home to one she'd forgotten she already had. The Maplewood house had been restored. The trust renovations finished just a week earlier. Bright new paint, a rebuilt porch, and a small brass plaque by the door that read, "The John and Margaret Collins Education Fund, for those who choose truth over comfort." When Maggie saw it for the first time, cried not the kind of tears that came from loss, but the quiet kind that come when something inside you finally unclenches. Today, the house wasn't empty. Children ran through the yard for the Trust's first scholarship open house. Volunteers served lemonade on the porch. Laughter and chatter filled the rooms that had once known only silence. Chloe snapped photos for the fund's new website, occasionally teasing her mother to smile more naturally. "Mom, I swear, you have a public face and a private face," she joked. Maggie laughed. "The private ones earn more wrinkles, so I think it deserves some sunlight." "You're glowing," Chloe said sincerely, lowering the camera. "You know that, right?" Maggie smiled, brushing a loose strand of gray hair from her face. "It's not glow, sweetheart, it's peace. I finally stopped fighting the wrong battles." Later, as the crowd thinned, Maggie stood by the oak tree in the front yard, the one John had planted decades ago, when Ethan and Chloe were still small enough to chase its shadow. It had thickened, spreading wide and protective, its roots deep and sure. She traced the rough bark with her fingertips. "You outlasted all of us," she murmured. From behind her came a quiet voice. "Maybe not all." She turned. Ethan stood there, hands in his pockets, his expression unsure, old and now, humbled but soft somehow. For a long moment, they just looked at each other the way people do when words would only get in the way. Then Maggie smiled. "You came." "Said I would," he replied. "You said you would when you were ready." He nodded. "I think I finally am." They stood beneath the tree, sunlight breaking through the leaves like scattered forgiveness. "I saw your interview," Ethan said quietly. "The one for the Tribune. You said Dad believed kindness wasn't weakness." "He did. I didn't understand that before," Ethan admitted. "I thought strength meant control, but it doesn't. It's being brave enough to tell the truth. And when it ruins you?" Maggie's eyes softened. "Sometimes it ruins the wrong things to make space for the right ones." He looked away, blinking back tears. "I'm sorry for everything, Mom." She stepped closer, resting a hand on his cheek, the same gesture she'd made when he was a boy afraid of the dark. "You don't owe me more apologies, Ethan. You owe the world your better self. Start there." He nodded, his voice breaking. "I'm trying. I know." Stood there until the noise from the house drifted toward them, laughter, the sound of doors opening, the chatter of volunteers. Ethan exhaled. "You turned this place into something alive again." Maggie smiled faintly. "It was never the house, Ethan, it was the people. It always was." That evening, after everyone had left, Maggie sat on the front steps, the warm wind tugging gently at her sleeves. Chloe came out with 2 cups of tea. "Big day," Chloe said, sitting beside her. "I think Dad would be proud." Maggie looked up at the stars beginning to bloom over the horizon. "I think he already knows." Chloe leaned against her shoulder. "What about you? Are you proud?" Maggie took a long sip of tea before answering. "I am, but pride's not what fills me anymore. It's gratitude, for endings that turned into beginnings." The two women sat there as the sky darkened, fireflies beginning to dance along the lawn. Somewhere down the street, the sound of laughter floated on the breeze, a family gathering, maybe, or neighbors on their porch. It struck Maggie how beautiful ordinary life could be when it was built on pretending. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of spring and wood smoke. "You know," she said softly, "for years I thought survival was the goal. Now I see it was just the start." Chloe smiled, her eyes glinting in the fading light. "What's the goal now?" Maggie looked toward the old oak tree, its leaves whispering in the wind like the voices of everyone she'd loved. "Living honestly," she said, "even when it's hard. Especially then." As the stars thickened over the quiet street, Maggie opened her journal one last time that night and wrote, "To anyone who's ever been told to stay silent, speak anyway. To anyone who's been underestimated, rise anyway. And to anyone who's loved deeply and been broken by it, love again anyway." She signed her name and closed the book, a soft smile spreading across her face. The night wrapped gently around the house. For the first time in a long, long while, everything felt exactly where it belonged. Thank you, dear readers, for walking this journey with me through the pain, the quiet, the resilience, and the rebirth of one woman's truth. Stories like Maggie's remind us that family isn't about perfection. It's about perseverance, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again. May your homes be filled with understanding, your hearts with compassion, and your days with gentle light. Wishing you and your loved ones peace, health, and happiness, today and always, with gratitude and love.